Hi, welcome to Miss Richardson's U.S. History 5-Minute Lectures. This information will be U.S. Notes 5.22, President Nixon and the Watergate Scandal. It includes information that aligns with the final section on your Unit 5 study guide. Now remember, you have control over this lecture. Make sure you're using your study guide to help you take your notes, and that you're pausing, writing down questions you have, and re-watching when you need to. Let's go ahead and get started. In 1968, Richard Nixon was elected President of the United States. You already know about his actions in Vietnam, which include Vietnamization and détente. So today I'm going to tell you about Nixon and his actions within the U.S. One change Nixon made when he entered the White House was to dismantle some of Johnson's War on Poverty programs, those Great Society programs that were trying to end poverty. He moved several of the programs to the state level and gave them control over it, which also meant the states had to cover the costs of the programs. He called this agenda the New Federalism. He did this really to save money for the federal government so they could focus on other issues. However, that's not why we remember Nixon today, nor is it his plan to end the Vietnam War why we remember him. Nixon is really remembered best because of a scandal that ultimately led to the end of his presidency, Watergate. So what happened in the Watergate scandal, you may ask? That's an excellent question. I think I'll tell you. Nixon was totally paranoid and worried that his enemies would defeat him in 1972. He saw many people and groups as enemies and believed they were trying to destroy his presidency. See, paranoid. He felt he could really help the U.S., and he needed to stay in power for a second term in order to do that. So he was really concerned about that. In order to win the '72 election, Nixon made some really poor choices. He chose to use very unsavory, immoral, and even at times illegal tactics to ensure he won the election and kept the presidency in 1972. Presidents are not allowed to do illegal activities. So what did he do? What was this all about? Well, starting, he spied on the opposition rallies and used the information to help his campaign. He had his helpers spread rumors and false reports about the guy he was running against, McGovern. And most damaging, there was a break-in by Nixon's supporters at the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C., hence the name Watergate for the scandal. This was an attempt, which Nixon then later tried to cover up. We'll talk about that in a minute. So the attempt was to steal sensitive information and to wiretap their phones so they would be able to listen in on the other guy's plans. This would allow Nixon and his campaign to know what the other side was planning before they even did anything. During the break-in, they were caught and 5 people were arrested. After the break-in, which really wasn't big news at first, the media started to dig deeper and discovered connections between the burglars and the White House. This began an investigation into Nixon and his involvement. What did he know? And this is where the cover-up comes in. So Nixon had administrators, so some of his officials, destroy incriminating documents. He had them give false testimony to investigators regarding the incident. Nixon actually ordered the leaders of the CIA to stop the FBI from investigating where the money came from that had been paid to the burglars. So the burglars were paid to break in. So he didn't want the truth to come out, and he was really trying to stop that. That's part of his cover-up, also known as obstruction of justice. So while all this happened, the White House and Nixon just denied any involvement in the incident. Deny, deny, deny. And during all of this was happening and unfolding, the 1972 election happened and Nixon easily won. So Nixon became president again and probably would have whether or not he had done these things. However, after the election, the Nixon tapes were discovered. These were recordings with large sections erased where Nixon was talking with those involved in the Watergate scandal. Nixon recorded every conversation in the Oval Office, so he had everything. The Supreme Court wanted them, but Nixon said he had executive privilege and didn't have to give it up. Then, in the middle of this, Nixon's vice president, Spiro Agnew, had to resign, and Nixon appointed Gerald Ford as his new vice president. Then, in July of 1974, the U.S. Supreme Court ordered Nixon to release the Nixon tapes without editing. The ones he had originally released had large sections cut out, remember. That same month, the House of Representatives voted to impeach Nixon due to criminal activities and obstruction of justice. So on August 9, 1974, President Richard Nixon chose to resign the office of presidency. He is the only president to ever do so. That allowed him to avoid impeachment charges. Otherwise, he would have been impeached. The Watergate scandal changed how Americans felt about the government. The Vietnam War had led many to distrust their leaders, and this just added to that disillusionment. So upon Nixon's resignation, Gerald Ford became our new president, and I'll tell you all about him in our next set of notes. So this is the end of 5.22. Hopefully you learned something. I'll see you in class.